There was a time when nobody thought twice about a cigarette burning in a hospital lobby, or kids climbing over car seats without a single buckle clicked in place, when grabbing a cold one before the drive home was just another night out. Backyard games with sharp metal darts, houses full of lead paint and asbestos insulation, and school paddles that smacked hard enough to leave memories. Even lighting up a smoke around your kids was perfectly normal. They were moments stitched into everyday life, ordinary back then, unthinkable now. So let's rewind to 13 things from 1970s America that were once completely normal, but would be banned today. If you stepped into a hospital in the 1970s, the first thing you might notice wasn't the smell of antiseptic, it was the smoke. Cigarettes burned steadily in ashtrays, placed right in waiting rooms, mixing with the beeps of heart monitors and the hush of worried visitors. Doctors and nurses, still wearing their white coats, would take quick smoke breaks right outside patients' rooms, sometimes even inside. There was no stigma, no sideways glances. After all, this was perfectly normal. A nurse on her break might chat with colleagues, a cigarette between two fingers, while children ran down the hallways with bandaged knees. The walls turned yellow from nicotine over the years, carrying the ghost of thousands of smokes that once seemed harmless. Even patients fresh from surgery or with oxygen tubes nearby could be seen lighting up in bed. A strange sight by today's standards. But back then, no one blinked an eye. The hospital gift shop sold packs of cigarettes alongside stuffed animals and greeting cards, as if they belonged together. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s that hospitals began strictly banning indoor smoking. By then, the world had finally woken up to the dangers of secondhand smoke. Today, the idea of lighting up a cigarette just a few feet from a newborn or a patient recovering from surgery feels unthinkable. But in the 1970s, it was simply part of life, a quiet gray haze that hung over even the places meant to heal us. In the 1970s, a car ride felt more like a moving living room than a carefully secured vehicle. Seatbelts, sure, they existed tucked somewhere between the seats, probably collecting dust. Kids climbed across the back seat, stood on the seat cushions, or curled up on the floorboards with a blanket. Sometimes they sat right on a parent's lap while driving, steering the wheel for fun, and no one thought twice about it. Riding in the way back of a station wagon, waving at the car behind you through the big rear window, that was the highlight of any road trip. Safety features were barely an afterthought. Airbags were rare, and those big metal dashboards were about as forgiving as a brick wall in a crash. By the mid-1970s, some public safety ads began urging people to buckle up, but plenty of families ignored them. Old habits died hard, and it wasn't until laws tightened in the 80s that seatbelts really became second nature. Today, a child riding without a car seat or a belt is unthinkable. Parents can even face fines or worse. But back then, the freedom to bounce around the car was just another part of growing up. In the 1970s, drinking and driving was treated more like a minor slip-up than a dangerous crime. A cold one for the road wasn't just a joke, it was something people actually did. It wasn't unusual to see someone crack open a beer behind the wheel, or pour a little whiskey into a cup for the drive home. Law enforcement didn't have the strict roadside tests or harsh penalties we know today. Getting pulled over often meant a warning or a friendly suggestion to take it easy. Parties ended with guests piling into cars, no designated driver, no Uber, and no second thoughts. It was just part of the culture. By the late 70s, campaigns began to change attitudes, showing the real consequences of drinking and driving. But for many families, those warnings came too late. Fatal crashes and heartbreaking stories were the harsh price of a carefree drinking culture. Today, strict DUI laws, breathalyzers, and designated drivers are the norm. But in the 1970s, driving after a few drinks was just another night out, a risk that seemed perfectly normal until it proved deadly. On a warm summer afternoon in the 1970s, you might find families gathered in the yard, laughing, cheering, and throwing metal-tipped lawn darts across the grass. They looked harmless enough, with plastic fins and a big hoop to aim for, but the sharp steel tips turned them into backyard missiles. Cookouts and birthday parties often featured a lawn dart match right alongside the grill. No one thought much about the danger, but emergency rooms quickly learned how risky they were, as kids and even adults ended up with puncture wounds, head injuries, and far worse. Parents who saw a dart land inches from a child's foot soon realized these were more weapon than toy. After multiple tragedies, lawn darts were finally banned in 1988, pulled from shelves after countless recalls. Today, the only things you'll toss across the lawn are soft beanbags or plastic rings. But for a whole generation, those dangerous darts will always be a memory of summer fun that went too far. If you grew up in the 1970s, there's a good chance your home was painted with lead-based paint, inside and out. Those thick, glossy colors clung to wood trim and windowsills, slowly chipping and flaking as kids ran their hands across them. No one worried about paint dust. Kids played near walls, sometimes even gnawed on window ledges, completely unaware of the danger. Lead paint was advertised as durable and easy to clean, the perfect solution for busy families. Moms wiped down painted surfaces every week, never realizing they might be spreading lead dust even further. It wasn't until health experts linked lead exposure to brain damage and learning disabilities that the tide turned. By the late 70s, removing lead paint became an emergency project for many families, scraping and repainting to keep their kids safe. Today, lead paint is banned in homes, replaced by safer options. But for many who grew up in the 70s, the colorful walls that seemed so cheerful were hiding a silent danger. In the 1970s, if you went poking around an attic or basement, you'd probably spot gray, fluffy insulation that promised to keep your house warm and fireproof. That miracle material? Asbestos. It was packed around pipes, stuffed into ceiling tiles, and hidden inside walls. It was cheap, easy to install, and praised as the best way to protect a home from fire and heat. Advertising called it safe, strong, and long-lasting. Nobody thought twice about breathing near it or handling it with bare hands. Then the truth hit. Asbestos fibers were deadly, causing lung disease and cancer, often decades after exposure. By the 1980s, entire teams in hazmat suits were hired to rip out the hidden killer that had been trusted for years. Today, strict laws control how asbestos is removed, and safer insulation options line the shelves. But for so many 1970s families, the stuff that was supposed to keep them safe turned out to be the most dangerous threat of all. Walk into a 1970s classroom, and you might see a wooden paddle resting right there in plain sight, like any other teaching tool. Corporal punishment was standard. If you talked back, acted out, or broke the rules, you could get swats right on the spot. Principals kept paddles on hooks behind their desks, almost like trophies. Many kids went home with tears and bruises, and parents usually backed up the teacher rather than complained. Fear of the paddle kept kids in line, and teachers believed it was the only way to teach respect. By the late 70s and into the 80s, parents and psychologists started to fight back, questioning if hitting kids really taught anything at all. Today, most schools ban physical punishment entirely, trading paddles for counseling, detentions, or positive reinforcement. But for anyone who went to school in the 1970s, the memory of that paddle and the fear it created is impossible to forget. In the 1970s, you could walk into any corner store and buy a little box of candy cigarettes, chalky white sticks that looked exactly like the real thing. The packages mimicked famous cigarette brands, down to the red stripes and cowboy mascots. Kids would stand around blowing imaginary smoke, practicing the same moves they saw grown-ups make. Parents barely flinched. It was considered harmless fun, a way to play adult while loading up on sugar. Later on, health advocates called out the dangerous message these treats sent and warned that they could normalize smoking for kids. By the 1990s, many countries banned candy cigarettes or forced companies to change the packaging so they wouldn't look like real smokes. Today, you'd struggle to find them on any shelf. But for 70s kids, that sweet, dusty taste and that pretend puff were just part of childhood. If you stepped into a party in the 1970s, you might see a pregnant woman with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and no one batting an eye. Even some doctors reassured expecting mothers that a little alcohol or smoking wouldn't hurt the baby. It was simply a social habit, passed around with a laugh, as women gathered for cocktails or an afternoon smoke break. Advertising didn't help either, often glamorizing taking the edge off during pregnancy. By the 1980s, research finally connected prenatal drinking and smoking with birth defects and lifelong health problems, shifting the entire conversation. Today, we see strict warnings everywhere, posters, doctors' offices, even on bottles. What was once casual and accepted is now viewed as incredibly risky. But in the 1970s, it was just another part of everyday life that no one really questioned. On a sunny day in the 1970s, you'd see kids piled into the back of a pickup truck, hair whipping in the wind, no seatbelts in sight. It was the ultimate freedom. Riding to the lake, a picnic, or a baseball game while sitting on the tailgate, or even standing up. No one worried about sudden stops, potholes, or other cars. You just trusted the road and held on tight. Car commercials even celebrated it, showing happy families enjoying the breeze from the bed of a truck. But the accidents were brutal. One sharp turn or a rear-end crash could throw passengers straight onto the asphalt. By the 1980s, laws finally started banning passengers in open truck beds, especially kids. Today, riding in a truck bed is illegal in most places and seems reckless to newer generations. But in the 70s, it was a rite of passage. Every fall in the 1970s, neighborhoods filled with the smell of burning leaves. You'd rake them into huge piles at the curb, light a match, and let them smolder for hours, sending thick gray smoke drifting down the block. Kids played nearby, jumping through dry leaves while the fire burned just a few feet away. Neighbors gathered around the piles, talking over the haze, enjoying that crisp, smoky scent of fall. Of course, the fires sometimes got out of control, setting grass or fences ablaze, and causing breathing problems for people with asthma. By the 1980s, environmental groups and firefighters pushed cities to ban open burning, citing pollution and safety. Today, leaves go into compost bins or biodegradable bags, a far cry from that smoky, dangerous tradition so many remember from their childhood. Back in the 1970s, toy safety standards were, let's just say, a bit relaxed. Plastic soldiers, doll accessories, and tiny building bricks were everywhere, and nobody thought much about choking hazards. Babies and toddlers stuffed small parts into their mouths, and parents just hoped for the best. Packages rarely included warning labels, and age recommendations were basically a suggestion. As accidents mounted, headlines called out dangerous toys that caused injuries, suffocation, or worse. It took injuries, lawsuits, and public outcry before regulators finally stepped in with stricter rules. Today, choking hazards are flagged, tested, and labeled with bright warnings. But for 70s kids, those tiny pieces were part of the adventure and the risk. In the 1970s, the phrase secondhand smoke barely existed. Parents smoked wherever they liked, the living room, the car, even right over a baby's crib. Long road trips meant a smoky haze drifting through the back seat, while kids tried to roll down the window. Ashtrays sat on coffee tables next to toy boxes, and no one thought to crack a window. Advertisements showed happy families, a cigarette in hand, without a hint of guilt or worry. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that researchers linked secondhand smoke to asthma, ear infections, and even sudden infant death syndrome. Today, smoking around kids is strictly regulated, even banned in many cars and public places. But for a 70s kid, breathing in secondhand smoke was just part of life, wrapped around them like a ghost of the times.